Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Drugs, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, April 12th, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today before we head into that weekend. Claire will be joining us in hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the calls, the phone when you call on him with your concerns about what we're reporting on today. Today is the anniversary of the flight of Yuri Gagarin, who was the first man in space all the way back in 1961. And, of course, the U.S. government said, harumph, harumph, how dare they beat us into space? And we got into the space race, which, of course, I guess officially ended with Apollo 11 reaching the moon. But Yuri was the first one up there that we know of. I know there are these persistent rumors that the Russians tried to fly some earlier humans who didn't quite make it all the way back. And in point of fact, the Russians did not announce Yuri Gagarin's flight until after it was all over. So who knows what's going on back there. The Soviet Union in those days was lying to their own people in the world just as much as the United States government is lying to their people and the world today. So it's kind of hard to know what was really going on there. Now, obviously, in the realm of lying to everybody in the world, and the lies are just flying thick and fast about what's going on here, North Korea, we're starting to see a split open up between the fear-mongering, war-mongering, we've got to get them now before they get us mindset, and we're starting to see more and more, even within the corporate media, pull back and say, this may not be such a really good idea. And we're seeing the rhetoric has just ramped up over in Russia today. They were saying North Korea threatens strike on Tokyo. It'll be consumed in nuclear flames and all this other harsh rhetoric. And Kim Jong-un is out there trying to prove how tough and crazy he is, or maybe he's on SSRIs or withdrawing from them, which is a dangerous thing to consider in the nuclear age. You know, we know how bad these medications are for people. What if our leaders are also on them? If 10% of the American people are on these medications, and that's not counting how many are getting the runoff through the water system, that's another aspect people really don't talk about, is that we're getting trace amounts of SSRIs in our drinking water in many cities. But to get back to the point here, Kim Jong-un is out there talking tough and ratcheting it up and talking about Tokyo being consumed in nuclear flames, and you know, it's not helping the situation any. Meanwhile, we're seeing more and more institutions like over at Raw Story saying that it's inaccurate to say North Korea has nuclear missiles. Yes, they've test detonated a bomb, but you know, they don't have good luck with their rockets. Their rockets don't have a huge payload. We were seeing all these ersatz leaks saying, oh, no, they've learned how to miniaturize those nuclear weapons. And one of the interesting pieces of propaganda that came out in the last 24 hours was this story that the U.S. government and the Pentagon have known for many, many months that North Korea had weaponized their nuclear bombs, and they had them on rockets, and they're ready to go. And it was only a mistake that this report was declassified. So see, really, we didn't just make this up yesterday. We've known about this a long time, and somebody goofed, and the report got out, and yeah. Now, I'm going to put out here a call to Rivero's Rangers, and that is that everywhere you see this story about North Korean nuclear missiles, post a comment reminding everybody the same people screaming about North Korea's nuclear weapons are the same ones who told us Iraq had nuclear weapons. So we ought to calm down just a little bit. Everywhere you can. Call to keyboards. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this ramp-up of propaganda that is out there, and we're starting to see a divergence. My interpretation is the internal polling is coming back that the American people are not buying yet another war for the money junkies. Pardon me. John Kerry is in South Korea right now. They're offering new talks to North Korea. They're trying to tone it down. CNN is running a story now about how Americans are confused about the North Korean threat, and they don't understand why so many Americans think that North Korea could actually have a nuclear strike on the United States. And they're just trying to look like, how could this happen? And it was only earlier in the week they were talking about EMP weapons over the North American continent and the mythical Kimchi-6 new rocket that nobody'd ever heard of before that was going to fling nuclear weapons all over the place. So it looks like they're pulling back and trying to tone this thing down, at least within some elements. Obviously, our government and certainly our financial system are very factionalized on whether or not to go ahead with these wars of dollarification across the globe. But it does look like the United States has blinked. That's going to make Kim Jong-un look really good in his part of the world, but that's his issue to deal with. But they're starting to pull back on this whole situation. But I expect we're still going to see a lot of that pro-war fear-mongering going on. And so, as I was saying before the break, this is a call to keyboards. For all you Rivero Rangers, while you're out there cruising around the internet, you're surfing the blogs and whatnot, everywhere you see a story posted that's screaming about North Korea has nuclear-armed missiles, they're doing this and doing that, just post a couple of comments here, real quick. Just keep in mind that all the people screaming about how North Korea might be a nuclear threat are the same people who said Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. And also keep in mind that for all the warnings about how Iraq had nuclear weapons, Iran wants nuclear weapons, and North Korea might have nuclear weapons, that in all of history, one and only one nation has ever actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country. And that nation is the United States of America. And that might just calm people down a little tiny, teensy bit. But we've been seeing all this stuff going on. Debka just came out screaming, U.S. defense is on DEFCON 3. And not that I would take anything Debka says at face value, but it's just more ratcheting up. We're trying to sell the fear. We've tried to try and get people ready to go. And the fact that now they're starting to come back and say, well, we don't know how everybody got this idea of a nuclear bomb raining down on us. I think the internal polls had to come back very negative. Americans are tired of war. Americans are well aware that these wars are not about ending terrorism. They're not about protecting the United States of America. They're about reimposing Bretton Woods on the entire world. And nations are abandoning the dollar faster than the U.S. can possibly conquer them, so this is a failed policy. It's time to basically push back from the table on this one. And yes, the United States is headed into a financial disaster, brought on us by the private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. The government let them do it, and now the government is going to have to own that mistake. By the way, a little side note. Back in 2000, Donald Rumsfeld, remember he who had been selling U.S. weapons to Saddam Hussein when he was our friend and then turned around and said, he's our enemy, we've got to get him. Donald Rumsfeld, aspartame guy. Well, back in 2000, Donald Rumsfeld was on the board of directors of a Swiss company that sold North Korea much of its present nuclear technology. So this seems to be an ongoing scam. Sell some country a bunch of weapons or nuclear technology and then turn around and say, oh, we've got to invade them. And then sell weapons to our country to invade the country you sold that other stuff to a few years earlier. By the way, if you've never seen it, there's a very wonderful movie out there called Wag the Dog. And it's a stellar cast. It came out during the Clinton administration. There are even veiled references to the Clinton administration within the movie itself. And it's a wonderful expose of how propaganda is built by the government to bamboozle the people. It's a very funny, wonderful movie. And I went back and I found a clip of it where the president's special advisor to deal with keeping a scandal out of the newspapers ahead of an impending election, hires a Hollywood producer to create the illusion of a war and a threat. And they're standing around talking about, well, we've got to attack Albania. Well, why Albania? Well, I don't know. I mean, terrorism. Well, people are I know. They just got the bomb. You know, and they've got well, that's not scary enough. They don't have rockets. Well, they've got a suitcase bomb. That's it. And just the parallels, the similarities between this scene and the way we have seen the propaganda about North Korea escalate and evolve. North Korea is going to hit us with a nuclear missile. Well, none of their rockets will go that far. Oh, they're building a secret rocket. Yeah, all their rockets explode. Well, they're going to do this, and they're doing numbers station, and they're going to do EMP, and it's just reminds me, well, not only of Wag the Dog, but of the old Maxwell Smart TV series. There was a running gag about, would you believe, Maxwell Smart has been captured by the enemy, and you say, would you believe this building is surrounded by a team of crack commandos? And the bad guy says, no, I wouldn't believe that. And Maxwell Smart said, would you believe that we're surrounded by a troop of Boy Scouts? And the bad guy says, I don't believe that. Maxwell Smart says, would you believe there's a guard out there with a toothless Doberman? And it was just sort of this running gag of trying to pull down to find what the level of belief is. And, of course, in the real world, the government goes the other way. They start with something small, and they say, oh, they bought that one, let's move it up a little bit. They bought that one, let's move it up a little bit. But we were seeing over the last couple of days the thrash mode, the sheer desperation, trying to find something that was going to sell this war to the American people. And I'm very proud of the American people that they did not fall for it, that they have developed a sense of healthy skepticism and discernment. And they recognize another ginned-up war when they see it. So I think the internal polls came back very, very negative, and that bodes ill for the private central bankers who just sort of assume that once again we can just solve all of our economic problems by creating a new world war and plunging the world back into debt for the next 100 years. By the way, interesting little story that was over in the Korean media itself. Apparently, Kim Jong-un has been presented with a floral basket by the Japan-Korea Society for Scientific and Educational Interchange. Doesn't sound like Japan and Korea are on the verge of war outside of the government propaganda to me. So anyway, North Korea, unless the U.S. is desperate enough to set off a nuke inside the United States to heat this thing up, it looks like it's very much on the wane. Meanwhile, the focus is shifting back onto Iran, and there's this very interestingly worded story over at Anti-War. Treasury Department, Iran in far-reaching plot to sell oil. Like, that's a bad thing? That's what Iran sells. They sell oil. And the United States is taking the position that Iran is not allowed to sell oil to anybody the United States does not approve of. And so the Treasury Department is going on about, we've got to keep Iran off the market. And it's extremely arrogant, and most nations are just ignoring the United States right now. They're just ignoring the sanctions. A lot of nations and companies actually have waivers from the U.S. government saying you don't have to obey the sanctions. It's all for PR. It's all for publicity. It's all to convince you there's a crisis in Iran that must be dealt with by throwing your children onto their bayonets. Destroy the Iranians. Destroy their state-owned central bank. Destroy their ability to sell oil for any currency other than the dollar. We're going to go to the phone. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome back. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Michael, how you doing there? Well, we got a scare last Thursday morning at 3 in the morning. We had a couple, I don't know what it was, but we had a bullet go through our bedroom, a 40 caliber. Thank God nobody got hit.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, you know what, Michael, I was in bed. The wife was laying with me, and I didn't hear the shots. But, boy, I tell you what, it sounded like a Volkswagen Rabbit just knocking the walls down. And we've been having a lot of that lately, Michael, where there's these drug Fruit Loops or whoever they are that don't know how to sleep at night, going around shooting into houses where I'm at right now. So
yeah.
It's just a dangerous situation. I think people are getting upset, and I think that was just a one that buzzed by, and we're just thankful that we didn't get hit or the baby or anybody. But, Michael, I wanted to tell you, you're right on the ball. You see the paradigm about let's go to get Iran. Now let's skip across the country and get on North Korea. So where are these idiots going to jump to next?
Africa.
To set up and say, this guy here has got this thing and all that. It is a bunch of propaganda, Michael. And the thing is this, you're right on it. You're right on the topic because it's about the banking system. They don't care who wins or loses. They just collect the money when the war gets on and goes through. But the thing about this, Michael, is you're preaching to the choir, brother. How much longer can they make this money, fictitious money, cover this financial big Ponzi scam, as even Bernie Madoff said in prison that he run?
Yes.
So I just wanted you to fill you in on that, big guy, and aloha, and have a good, peaceful weekend, and watch out, be vigilant, so you don't get anything. All right.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I want to respond to some of the things that Scott in Wisconsin was saying. First of all, regarding the bullet coming through their bedroom. It is a reminder to anybody who is out there who is a shooter, you are always legally responsible for where that bullet goes when you pull the trigger. And a full metal jacket, 9mm or 40 caliber, can go through 9 to 12 sheets of the gypsum wallboard used in modern construction and still have enough energy to kill somebody. So this idea of just firing bullets in the air, I mean, if you're in a little town in the Wild West and you're shooting up in the sky, you know it's going to come down and hit a cactus someplace. But inside a city, it's a completely different matter. Safety, 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 safety. Now, why was the trigger pulled? Well, we know our society is under extreme stress that is caused by the private central bankers, skyrocketing prices, skyrocketing taxes, dropping wages and salaries. We're all feeling caught between the rock and the hard place. And as a result, people are trying to cope with that stress, very often with intoxicants, legal and otherwise. And especially in an age where police departments are being cut back, there's a lot of very weird behavior out there. We have drug activity in this neighborhood. We've had some incidents of violence, domestic violence. Yelling and screaming. People are they don't know where to direct their anger right now. And we have some people who get really wild and wacky every once in a while, and they hop the fence down to the golf course and have wild parties down there. Fortunately, without guns, but it's happening all across America. And if you want a measure of that, just recall how the alcohol sections at your local supermarkets and drugstores have grown over the last 5 to 10 years. It used to be a little tiny section. Now it's an entire aisle, and they're getting taller and taller racks. And that was a symptom of the former Soviet Union in the years leading up to the collapse of that nation. Alcohol abuse just exploded across the entire country. People knew, even if they couldn't quantify it, they knew in their guts something had gone horribly wrong. And they were trying to cope with that stress. So just a couple of little things to keep in mind there. We're going to go back to the phones. Larry in Oregon. Aloha, Larry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You know, you're exactly right, Michael. People get violent. They shoot the wrong people.
That's exactly right.
I wanted to ask you if you'd heard of a political movement in the 1880s called Silverites.
I've heard the word, but I don't know much about them. Please enlighten us.
Well, I think I'd rather you kind of look it up and get up on it before I make any comment on it.
Okay, I'll do that.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you was, you with your monetary system backed up by electrical units, did I say that right?
Yes.
Do you feel that that's really stable enough to control the volume of money in circulation?
Yes, I do, because it does take a certain amount of energy, effort, and resources to generate that unit of electricity. But at the same time, the electricity is available in abundant enough supply where it can't be hoarded and monopolized, like we're seeing the big central banks and investors trying to do with gold right now ahead of a collapse of the Federal Reserve.
Well, you're exactly right on that. I was just wondering about whether they have a cascade during a storm or something and all the electric goes down for the whole East Coast, or oil companies, electrical production being done with oil, where the generators are run with oil, fired up with oil, that sort of thing. Do you think that it would have any influence on the total volume, or
Well, it's going to have an influence, but then any natural disaster or any corporate malfeasance causes financial harm regardless of how your money is being denominated. So it's something, again, if the electricity is the money, if the money is basically linked to a unit of electricity, you're going to see a tremendous boom in the development of more efficient power generation, transmission, and storage. And, of course, because that unit of electricity is essentially tokenized, the coinage and currency won't vanish if there's a power blackout. And there are some issues to definitely work out, but it's like what happens hypothetically when you have your currency linked to gold and a ship full of gold bullion sinks and is unreachable. Does that destroy the monetary system? No, it really doesn't. So we know that silver-backed currencies and gold-backed currencies survived fluctuations in the actual physical supply, and with electricity, it's just basically the same problem to solve.
Well said, Michael. Thank you for taking my call.
You've got it, and we're going to switch over. Well, actually, no. We're coming up on a commercial break, and I don't want to cut Gil off. So, Gil, stay through the commercial. We're going to take your call as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. Anyway, getting back to the situation, apparently the Pentagon is now very concerned that one of their the military forces in the Economic Community of West African States, known as INFOWARS, are inept, and they now want to send the U.S. AFRICOM in to garrison that part of Africa. Grab the resources. Shackle them to the dollar. That's the agenda. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Gil in Arizona. Aloha, Gil. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. This Israel and might have a connection with Korea. We know they sell all our secrets to anybody that'll buy them.
Yes.
And the Israeli Zionist regime, they have a problem. It's a superiority complex as well as God's chosen complex. And,
well, the two are kind of the same thing. It really is, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I remember an article I read in an old newspaper. It was called The Spotlight many years ago, and it always stuck with me that Israel had developed what they call a doomsday weapon, that if they lost, they figured they'll take the world with them. Mm-hmm. Somewhere it might have been Cobalt 60 or what have you. And just by coincidence, I heard a program the other day on another network, and the guy was saying that Israel had sold this Cobalt 60 to North Korea, and North Korea is threatening to use that on one of their rockets, which essentially would wipe out the world.
Okay, well, let's pull back a little bit and address some of the topics. First of all, this whole idea of Cobalt 60 and these long-lived isotopes sounds really good in science fiction and movies like Dr. Strangelove. Nobody has developed a weapon that will destroy the entire planet for a very simple reason. The leaders of nations have incredibly huge egos, and they go to bed at night dreaming and probably abusing themselves to images of future generations of their countrymen, worshiping their picture on the postage stamps and the currency and statues. Israel, of course, has threatened nuclear blackmail against other countries, but not the planet as a whole. And so I don't see Israel doing anything that would damage Israel. Of course, Israel would be perfectly happy if the United States and Russia and China destroyed each other in a nuclear war, because then Israel, with its nuclear arsenal, would pretty much be calling the shots on the planet afterwards. But I don't really see them as having implemented any kind of a plan to destroy the entire world under this "if we can't have it, nobody can" mindset. And it therefore follows that North Korea, which may have in fact received much of their nuclear weapon technology from Israel for reasons we've already detailed, they're basically for weapons and not planetary immolation. In fact, if you look at the trend of nuclear weapon design, since the early days, the trend has been to smaller and smaller, lower-yield tactical weapons. The big, giant city melters, like the Soviet Union Tsar bomb, which was a demonstration only. They only built one of them. They're not doing that anymore. It's small, targetable, tactical nuclear weapons, 15 to 50 to 100 kiloton range. The big, super 3 megaton bombs those just aren't being developed anymore. They're seen as counterproductive, mostly because when you want to invade another country with nuclear weapons, you want as much of the buildings and infrastructure standing after it's all over in order to commercially exploit your conquest. That was the reason behind the development of what was called the neutron enhancement weapon, or the neutron bomb, which was designed to kill people but leave the cities intact afterwards for immediate reoccupation and exploitation. So, but I really, it doesn't make sense to me that anybody has really come up with a Dr. Strangelove type weapon. The real danger, of course, is that if all the nuclear nations in the world start flinging their bombs everywhere, we're going to be in the same fix anyway. We're looking at all the health damage just from the Fukushima release and Chernobyl, and realizing that these long, lingering radiation effects are really far more serious than was anticipated, and certainly far more than the governments and companies involved care to admit, but we are seeing them.
Well, that kind of makes me feel better. Now I can just sit back and wait for the Zionists to watch us destroy ourselves then.
No, remember when Israel was out there bombing Palestine, and all the Israelis went out to the border with their binoculars, and it was war tourism? It was just, oh yeah, look at the bomb. And it's, okay, that's not something I want to see. I want a little comment here about nuclear weapons, especially because we have been having them fanned at us as big, horrible, terrible things, and we've all seen the video of these giant multi-megaton tests down in the South Pacific. The reality is that they are not, in terms of real world, they're very, very powerful, but they're not something that is automatically going to wipe everybody off of a complete city or from an entire state. Their effectiveness has almost been amplified and overblown by movies like Terminator, whatever. They are very large, and they are very, very powerful. There's no question about that. But if you are a moderate distance away from them, they are, in fact, survivable, especially in an era where the vast majority of nuclear weapons that are being deployed are these smaller tactical nuclear warheads. And there are online calculators you can find that will give you the nuclear effects of a nuclear bomb detonation. You can basically say, I live just outside this city, and if a nuclear bomb was deployed in the center of that city, what would be the effects that I would feel? And we ran those calculations for where we live here on the island of Oahu for a nuclear bomb dropped on Pearl Harbor. And it would certainly be uncomfortable, but not necessarily guaranteed fatal. A lot of broken glass that we would have to deal with. And so you need to understand that if you survive the thermal flash itself, air is a poor conductor of mechanical energy. And the effectiveness and the compression waves fall off very, very quickly. Besides, current military doctrine is not to target the cities and population centers of each other's countries, but their military bases, because that is where the threat of a counterstrike is coming from. So the idea that North Korea is going to nuke Los Angeles or San Francisco is nonsense. If they were stupid enough to launch a nuclear strike against the United States of America, they're going to target the military bases. Guam, yes. The U.S. military bases in Japan, yes. Pearl Harbor, yes. They're not going to target New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. That doesn't really give them a military advantage to do. So, a lot of overstatement. We're a generation that has never really seen a real nuclear bomb go off, outside of those who were able to drive out to Nevada and see the last of the above-ground tests there. So we're the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened before most of us were born. And so we don't really have an immediate sense of experience of what it's like to go through that. I'm not saying these are trivial weapons. They aren't. But, again, it's not an automatic kill of everybody that you know if these things get used here. All right. We're going to go back to the phones again. We've got George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, how do you, Mike? I just want to remind you that today is the 101st anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic.
I thought that was either Wednesday or yesterday. But anyway,
April 12th.
April 12th. Okay.
Yeah, and it's just a lesson of what money junkies do when they cut corners on building a ship. by not having enough lifeboats on the ship and raising the bulkheads up past E-deck.
You are absolutely correct. It is a classic example. White Star Line was actually a victim of its own bad luck because I think before Titanic, White Star had not lost a ship for something like 25 years. And the thinking back then was because there was so much ocean traffic, there was always going to be a ship nearby where your lifeboats were really to just ferry people across to the other ship and go back and forth multiple times. And there was, in fact, another ship very close to the sinking of the Titanic, the Californian. And they had just turned off their radio. They didn't think to ask why all these fireworks were going off over Titanic. And it was a huge, it was basically the end of the career for the captain of the Californian. But that was the reasoning behind not having as many lifeboats. They weren't thinking in terms of keeping the entire ship's company and passengers floating at sea for hours on end. The idea was there would always be another ship that would come to help. It was the law of the sea. You always immediately proceed to a ship that sends a distress signal. And had the Californian answered, it would have been a tragic sinking and a financial loss. It wouldn't have been the huge history-making disaster that it now is.
Well, you know, the strange thing is, I think it's White Star Line or Cunard was owned by J.P. Morgan.
Yes.
And most of the wealthy on the Titanic were against the Federal Reserve System. That's one of the reasons they're heading back to America.
Well, I'm not sure about that. There was certainly some opposition to the Federal Reserve System for people who were not part of it. But I don't think you could blanket say that the wealthy that were on board that ship, for one thing, many of them were not American. They were Europeans coming over to New York for a visit. So I don't think that's really a good generalization.
And another thing, I was sitting there listening on the local news today, or like last night about that stabbing at the Houston College.
Yes.
And the thing is, they're all saying, oh, we had violent fantasies of beheading people at 8 years old. I'm like, something really stinks here.
Well, that's a new development because when he was arrested, he was telling police that he'd been recently having uncontrollable fantasies of running through a crowd and stabbing people. And, of course, the first thing you start asking is, was this guy on these prescription antidepressants? And that is something they're not going to allow out. So for them to come back and say, well, he's had fantasies of beheading people when he was 8 years old. And you know something? It's not that uncommon. Okay? Every child, when they are growing up, when they start to become aware of their own mortality, they go through a very dark, morbid phase. They get into the monster movies. They make the little model kits of the guillotines and the Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman. And so that's actually a normal part of growing up as you go through that sort of psychological exploration of death. And then most people grow out of it, unless they're intending to run for Congress, and then they sort of keep those dark fantasies to themselves. So that's not really that uncommon. My concern is, 99% of the population, we all have fantasies about causing harm to people that we don't like, or just that thrill of power, that unrestrained energy that we all do, in fact, have inside of us. But we keep it under control. We sublimate it into writing scripts for horror movies or our artwork or something else. But for these people who are on these SSRIs, that dark side is allowed to come on out. And in a very real way, if you're familiar with this classic science fiction movie, Forbidden Planet, where and it's an old movie. Leslie Nielsen played the starship captain. Gene Roddenberry drew much of the inspiration for Star Trek from it, and it's an absolutely amazing movie. If you get a chance to see it, I think it was on TCM here about a month ago. And the whole. Go ahead.
Well, I got one more story. It was on the same channel.
Well, can I finish the story about Forbidden Planet? Okay, because the whole point of the story was this planet that they were visiting had this advanced civilization millions of years ago, and all of a sudden it vanished in a single night. And it isn't until you get all the way through the movie that you realize they built a machine that allowed their minds to directly create whatever material goods they needed in front of them. If you needed a toaster, the toaster would appear in front of you. And the problem was that deep inside the minds of the Krell, there was still the ancient primitive instincts that they'd evolved from. And when they were able to get control of this machine, all of their horrible fantasies came on out and basically wiped the entire planet out. And in a very real sense, these SSRI medications are starting to do the same thing here with the human population. People on these medications are no longer able to keep this dark, primitive violence inside themselves. And it comes on out, and they grab a gun or a knife or a sledgehammer or whatever, and they start doing mass killings, or they kill themselves. And very often when it's all over and they say, I don't know, it just happened. And that's why these medications are so dangerous. Okay, you wanted one more story.
Yes, at the Can Academy in Houston, there was two people off school property. I don't know, they were sitting in a car and talking or something. They weren't bothering nobody. Somebody on the campus thought, oh, this is suspicious. They locked down the school and they held these two people for a couple of hours. They didn't find a gun. They didn't find nothing. But it just shows the absurdity, the overreaction of people, you know.
Yeah, we are in an era of overreaction where I remember right after 9/11, and I was working in downtown Honolulu at a production company, and there was a lockdown of the entire block, and they were screaming anthrax attack, and it turned out somebody in the staff room at an office had accidentally dumped some coffee creamer powder on the shelf and not cleaned it up, and somebody said, oh my God, it's anthrax, and just everybody went ballistic on it. Yeah, it was an overreaction. But that's of course what the government and the corporate media want. That's the whole point of this scarism campaign. To get everybody just jumping and flinching at anything that could possibly be suspicious, so we're so afraid and frightened and timid that we're not able to think clearly and objectively about what's really going on.
I mean, I even got called by the police sitting in a Walmart parking lot talking on my cell phone, getting a shopping list for things to shop for.
Yeah, it's pretty extreme, all right.
And I had 4 cop cars pull up to me saying, do you have a gun? Do you have this? Do you have that? I'm like, I mean, it was just somebody who just reported me. It's like, geesh.
Yeah, well, it's crazy. And you know something? There are people who are always looking for something that they can get involved in to feel good about themselves. And long before 9/11, long before War on Terror, when I still lived in West Covina, the city where that guy just tried to saw his own arms off, we had a neighbor who called the police constantly about all kinds of imaginary things, and the cops just started ignoring her after a while. But there are people like that. Oh, there's a rapist hiding in the rose bushes, and there are muggers lurking in the azaleas, and it just that's how they feel good about themselves.
Well, next week I have to go to court to be a witness because there's this nice family restaurant we go to, and he started losing business because this black woman kept calling CPS on people for little things, like a parent turned their back for a second, child abuse called CPS and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And this one was driving away business. Well, finally the owner said, you no longer can't be here anymore.
Yeah.
And so they tried to use the race card. So I had to go to court saying, no, I said I had to stop going because she was not minding her own business. I said there was no abuse, there was no child got hurt. It's just this woman just constantly calling social service workers on people. So I have to go to court next week on that.
Well, good luck on that one. And we saw a lot of those abuses back during the 90s, during this whole feminism. Women were screaming rape just for having their hands touched, and it is. And it's part of keeping everybody just so flinchy with each other, they're not paying attention to what the government's doing. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, George. We'll be back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're picking up with Eric in Sacramento. And, Eric, I'm going to start off by saying I do not for a second buy any theories that Titanic was sunk deliberately. But I'd like you to share with us, you've been talking about portholes and serial numbers and everything. What is it you're trying to say about Olympic and Titanic?
Well, what I really want to say is it wasn't the Titanic, it was the Olympic. The two letters of M and P fell off, and you could see underneath it was A and N because they were welded on. I'm just saying when they went down.
Hang on.
Then they counted the portholes.
Hang on a second. Hang on. Eric, we're going to let you go here. I've heard this nonsense before, and I'm going to give you a response on it, and I don't want to be interrupted by it. The Olympic and Titanic were not identical ships. The Olympic was the first of three to be put into service, and ship's architect, Mr. Andrews, I forget his last name, obviously sailed on the maiden voyage to basically look at how the design was working. And as problems showed up on the Olympic, changes were made to the blueprints for Titanic. The most obvious change was to the promenade decks on Deck A and Deck B. On Olympic, the A-deck promenade was fully open, but because of the rough seas in the North Atlantic, the sea spray, and the wind, the promenade deck on A-deck on Titanic was enclosed for the first half of the ship. It's a very, very obvious difference. And you can see it on the wreck of the Titanic. James Cameron had that enclosed promenade in his movie. You can see it in all the deep dives that are down there. Now, down on B deck, there was also an open promenade on Olympic, but they noticed it wasn't really being used at all. And so on Titanic, that open B deck promenade was converted to first-class cabins with private little promenades, one of which figures as a location in James Cameron's movie. And because they weren't booking that many first-class passengers, what had been the first-class cabins on Olympic were converted to these themed restaurants. And as a result, on Olympic, those B-deck stateroom portholes are evenly spaced. But on Titanic, in order to basically go along with the design of all these themed restaurants, they're spaced quite irregularly. These are two very obvious differences, and if you look at photographs of the wreck of the Titanic and the wreck of the Olympic, it is beyond question those are the ships they are supposed to be. And I imagine somebody somewhere is making a lot of money selling books about the Titanic deception, but really, the two ships were nowhere identical. They were huge. I'll give you another difference. The bridge wings, those little wings that go out from the bridge to the sides of the ship. On Olympic, they were flush with the hull. But that led to some problems with docking such a gigantic ship, and so on Titanic, the bridge wings project out over the water. That's another difference between the two ships that's easy to see in the photographs. All right, moving right along, we have Aaron in Texas. Aloha, Aaron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I just had a quick comment and a quick question. I'm going to go ahead and go with the comment first. My comment is, I've noticed how the mainstream media has been
Aaron, I hate to do this to you, and it's my fault because I wasn't watching the clock. We're coming up on a commercial break here, and so that you don't have to rush or anything, I'm going to ask you to just be patient, stay with me through the commercial, and we'll be right back to talk about, your concerns and your point here. But I didn't want to let you get going and just have to cut you off. And again, that's my fault. I wasn't watching the clock. We're going to take another break here for some commercials, and we will be right back with Aaron in Texas after these words from our sponsors. Oh, boy. Welcome back to the show here. I'm watching CNN, and right on time, we have defectors from North Korea to tell you all what terrible people they are and how they are suffering under their cruel tyrant. We must go in with a humanitarian intervention. Yeah, I'm seeing a real sense of factionalization within the government. There are still those who say, yes, let's just go in and clean that up and, more war because it's not my kids and my money that we're spending on this. But I'm seeing, again, more and more corporate media and more people within the government, especially the intelligence agencies, are saying this is really not a good idea because we are risking war with China. And that's a serious matter. And of course, the money junkies are saying, sure, war with China. We got to get rid of that gold yuan. That's the whole point of this thing. Back to Aaron in Texas. Thank you for waiting through the commercials. Please commence again.
Yes, sir. I've noticed that in my past, since I was growing up, I'm barely 26. I'm still young. Yes. I was taught in high school and in all these books about the Civil War and how we know it was for the black people and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't start realizing how these wars were all bankers' wars until recently. I started listening to you, and I started noticing that how the CNN and Fox News, they're big liars.
Yes.
So I wonder sometimes, this is my comment, and it's just a comment, I wonder sometimes if maybe they were lying about Hitler himself. I mean, maybe they were lying about all the bad things he was doing, because one thing they don't mention is that the Soviet Union themselves had concentration camps with Jews in it. And, of course, when Hitler betrayed them or they started fighting, I mean...
Well, I'm very glad to hear somebody in your age bracket ask that question. If they lied to us about Saddam's nukes, if they lied to us about the real reasons for anything, did they lie to us about World War II? And the answer, of course, is yes. They've been lying all along, and prudence demands, in light of this grand awakening that we are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, that we never take anything the state schools or the corporate media or the government tell us at face value. A skeptical people are a free people. And I'm just delighted that somebody in your age bracket is starting to ask that very question, because it is the most important question young people can be asking right now. If they lied to us about X, are they also lying to us about Y? And then you go and look for yourself, and you'll generally find out the answer you need to have.
And my real question was, do you think we're so desperate, these bankers are so desperate to go to war, you think they might pull off maybe a small nuke in one of our major cities, or you think they won't go that far?
I can't rule it out. I don't think they will, but I can't rule it out. I mean, we have seen presidents assassinated for standing up to the bankers. We have seen wars started for standing up to the bankers. It's possible, and I don't think any reasonable person can rule it out as a possibility.
I mean, yeah, because I can't really compare a nuke to 9/11 because that was two different. I mean, a nuke is a way bigger destruction. So I was just, kind of curious. Maybe they might pull off some little false flag attack, just say to blame it either on Iran or to blame it either on North Korea. You think, what are they, now that they've been talking about North Korea, I've noticed that they haven't really talked about Iran, or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, Iran the focus was put on North Korea, and I think the thinking was that they weren't getting any traction with the American people to go into Iran, because Iran hadn't done anything, and there wasn't any evidence of wrongdoing on their part. So the money junkies were saying, all right, well, let's just get a backdoor with war. We'll go through North Korea and get into war with China and Russia that way. But again, based on Kerry is now in South Korea, and they're talking about renewing talks, and everybody's starting to pull back. Again, my read of this is the internal polling came back very, very negative on yet another war. And at this point, are the money junkies desperate enough, as you say, to set off a small nuclear bomb someplace? We cannot rule it out. I don't think it's likely, but we cannot rule it out.
All right, Mike, that's all I had. I love your show. Keep it up, man. And you have balls of steel, man, standing up to these well-paid bankers with these pretty rich empire cycle people.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words here. And let me go back and qualify my statement. I think it is far more likely the money junkies will set off a nuclear bomb inside the United States of America than either North Korea or Iran. So that's what we have there. All right, looks like the phone lines are now open, and I'm going to get back to some of the other news stories I wanted to cover here. The Venezuelan government has released evidence in the form of recorded phone conversations and other documents showing that the opposition in this upcoming election over the weekend has already put together a plan to not recognize the election results. Now, interim President Maduro, who was Hugo Chávez's ideological successor, is way ahead in the polls if you read the Venezuelan newspapers, and only slightly ahead in the polls if you read the American newspapers. And now we're seeing this indications that the opposition's plan is to cry foul, to say we don't recognize the election results, and try and kick up some kind of a civil uprising. The government of Venezuela has already closed the border because of the large influx of hired operatives, agent provocateurs, that have been flooding into the country. And so it looks like the plan there to take control of Venezuela, and more importantly, its oil, to make sure it's only for sale for the U.S. dollar, is regardless of how the election comes on out, they're going to kick up a huge fuss, say, oh, Venezuela is deteriorating into a civil war and riots, and they'll say humanitarian intervention, and the U.S. will go in, install a new puppet government in Venezuela, like they've done for pretty much every other South American country. And again, the goal, the real agenda, is to shackle Venezuela's oil to the U.S. dollar, to prop up that dollar in the international marketplace. Now then, according to the United Nations, weapons that were poured into Libya as part of that overthrow, to get rid of Gaddafi, get rid of their state central bank, and most importantly, to get rid of that gosh darn gold dinar, those weapons are now flooding out to other countries in the region, including Syria. And all that violence and death and bloodshed, but you know, they got rid of the gold dinar, and that makes it all worthwhile. That's all that really matters, protecting the banks, protecting the bankers. Doesn't matter how many people get killed. And that's not excessive to say, because if you go back and you look at all wars are bankers' wars, hundreds of millions of human beings have been sent to cruel death and disfigurement as the cost of doing business to keep this little private central bank scam in control of the world. And it is really that obvious. Now, here domestically, we're seeing some rather interesting behaviors in the economy. The retail numbers for March are out. Retail sales are falling. People are being very conservative with their money. They're not going out to buy the latest gizmo and gadget. And it's rather interesting. They're saying U.S. retail sales fell unexpectedly in March. It's a rather interesting story. Aren't you guys supposed to be keeping an eye on this stuff? Have you ever noticed when something good comes out, oh yes, it's according to our predictions, it's what we told you was going to happen. And when the numbers come out bad, ooh, that was unexpected. It's kind of a little political situation there. The economic data that is coming out, and several reports were due today, is very much in the negative. The U.S. economic data plunges the most in 10 months to a 4-month low. And the stock markets, we're taking a beating. I can see the plunge protection team desperately massaging the stock market, heading for that traditional Friday happy ending. I don't know that they're going to get it there, but they're getting it close. They're trying to run that thing up here. Meanwhile, again, we're seeing these stories about how gold is heading for the third straight weekly fall in thin market. Gold is down by something like $60 to $80, and everybody's saying, this doesn't make any sense. We're hearing about these banks in Europe unable to meet their gold futures contracts. They're running out of gold in the gold stores in India and Thailand. It doesn't make sense the price is going down unless it is being rigged. And, of course, it is. What they're doing, the people were anticipating these economic reports were not going to be very good, so they start selling these paper gold contracts. And remember, under the rules they have created for their own benefit, the value of those paper gold contracts is blended with the value of the physical gold and silver to come up with a single number. And the two are not behaving the same. It is those paper contracts that are declining in price because of the inability to deliver by many places. And the physical is sort of dragged in there with it because the goal of the money junkies is to convince you to start selling your gold and silver so they can buy it up at a good price, because they need to replace a lot of that gold that they've been taking out of those bullion banks. But that's how they do it. Anytime they need the price of gold or silver or platinum or palladium to go down, they start pouring out those futures contracts. And when they come due, as is already happening, and the physical gold is unavailable to deliver, and they can't lease anymore from the New York Federal Reserve or the Bank of England or the Bank of France, they'll offer stacks and stacks of that freshly printed paper and ink stuff and hope the contract owners will settle for that. And they're paying, premium. It's the current melt value of the gold plus will give you 20%. And most people are going for that. But sooner or later, somebody is going to start suing these gold brokerages for failure to deliver the physical on that contract. But that's how they keep these gold and silver prices down. And under the laws of supply and demand, right now you should be seeing gold and silver going right through the roof. And if it is not, it is another indication of fraud. And over in Europe, they're already investigating to see if the London gold and silver price fix, emphasis on fix, is being rigged the way the LIBOR was. I'm going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. Joe in Manhattan. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike.
Hi.
Actually, it was quite interesting about you talk about the economy in overall doing bad. Actually, in New York, in Manhattan, there's actually a real estate bubble again in some area parts of Manhattan, and real estate prices are going up. They're going up again, and it's unsustainable. So, I have a little dinky apartment, 635 square foot. I get over $700,000 worth. I mean,
that's insane. That's insane. But you need to remember, the bankers want housing to be expensive because then they make more money off the mortgages. If you could buy a nice home and pay it off in 5 years like a car, after that 5 years, you are no more use to the bankers. And that's why they want those housing prices up. They're holding all these foreclosed homes off the market because they don't want to see the prices go down any longer. It's just another way of basically enslaving the people to the money junkies.
You know, it's crazy. Everybody, all the young people in Manhattan, they're coming here, they're all applying for jobs in the Fed, New York Fed. You know, everybody's looking for jobs in the banking sector and in the economy. It's like two kinds, like there's absolutely, and people just like
okay,
crazy.
you're gonna have to slow way down because your phone connection is breaking up and it's very hard to understand you. Talk to us like we're all on Quaaludes.
Okay, sorry, sir. Yeah, I gotta use better connection next time. And also, there's I told you a screen about technological suppression.
Yes.
Other issue. Yeah, they had in 1982. I heard rumors there were things that select few in college campuses could see that the public still doesn't have.
Mm-hmm.
That the technology that the general public has is not as good what they had back in the early 80s. And so I didn't see it myself. There's so much technology that's being suppressed in that device. I don't know how it must be just totally like the total breakaway civilization. Right now they have all the technology developed and they aren't sharing with the general public. Paying billions, DARPA's paying billions on these programs.
Well, the military, as a general rule of thumb, the military likes to hold itself between 10 and 20 years ahead of the civilian private sector. To have a military advantage. You also need to understand that large established corporations that are marketing a given technology are very much opposed to anything new coming along that might be a challenge to it. And they'll very often go out and buy up patents on inventions that might challenge the existing status quo, and they will sit on them until they're done selling whatever it is they're selling. Then they will basically bring it forward as something new that they themselves will own. So there's a lot of suppression that does go on, not just within the government.
Also, Arbitron has this new technology. Give people like a little device, and the device actually what it does is the device what it does is actually it knows you don't have to touch or anything. It knows what TV station you're on, radio station you're watching, knows everything you're doing in the car or house or anything, and keeps it. That's how it gets ratings points. And they can actually know wirelessly what you're doing and exactly what you're doing. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, it's fresh. There's media companies. There's actually a book written. One time there was a college professor that said there was a book. He says there's a book written about how the secrets of the media industry, how they do like mind control to the television.
Well, let's not blur the line here. I mean, first of all mind control is controlling the brain by controlling what it knows. For TV, TV only gives you the information that will lead you to conclude of your own free will what the government and advertisers want you to conclude. That's all mind control is. Okay. Okay, Joe, my turn. Joe, my turn. Thank you. As far as monitoring your TV and radio habits, Arbitron works much like the Nielsen's do. They go out to a selected number of homes and they install a physical box that will just keep a record of what's going on. Okay, Joe, we're going to let you go here so that I can finish the topic. Okay. The modern cable TV boxes have this function built in, where they are keeping track of your viewing habits to say what shows are being watched and what shows are not being watched, in the idea to designing something that is going to appeal to the largest audience to feed the advertisers to. Your radio in your car, of course, is another matter entirely, and Arbitron, as of the last time I dealt with them, Arbitron simply does that with surveys and polls and calling people and seeing, what are you listening to. Now, many years ago, when I was in Los Angeles, a very good friend of mine and I tried to put together a device that would be mounted on overpasses that would listen to cars going by for what is called the local oscillator in the radio. And by listening to the frequency the local oscillator was set to, we could tell what station they were listening to. And we couldn't get support or funding for this because it turns out that most of the radio and television stations are generally hedging their audience numbers. And they didn't want a real accurate measure for what was going on out there. So that really didn't work out too well. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm just looking at a real quick news story that came across my desk where they've arrested a German man at the Athens International Airport trying to sneak a half-ton of gold and silver out of Greece. And yet, we're being told gold and silver isn't worth anything. You should sell all of your stuff. Gold just set a record high against the yen. So it's all manipulation. Back to the phones. Tom in Michigan. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
This is kind of a hard subject to cover because radiation is a very complex thing. But if you take a look at Fukushima and what's going on over there, we keep hearing these stories of radiation releases, so many becquerels per kilogram, but they don't tell us what it is that's releasing the becquerels. If you don't know the radionucleotide, then it's worthless information. You must know that. Arnie Gunderson has hinted at this, but he can't say it, because if he does, he'll be instantly chastised and out of a career. But as it appears, and what TEPCO is doing over there, and with their cover-ups, and if you look at the radionuclides that are involved, Fukushima is an extinction-level event. It's going to take them, they're saying, at least 20 years, while they're dumping trillions of becquerels into the ocean. Arnie said it when he pointed out that if that spent fuel pool collapses, it's bye-bye Northern Hemisphere. That was
it is a very, very serious situation over there. The radionucleotides are known. Basically, it's the unspent uranium fuel and the fission byproducts, some of which are very short-lived, like the cesium. Others, of course, have much longer periods. And it's not just the spent fuel rod pool that is a problem. The problem with the spent fuel rod pool is that if it loses its cooling, if they can't keep cooling liquid in there, those rods are still very hot because of decay activity within the fuel rods. They could heat up to the point of spontaneously combusting, and you'd have all this radioactive smoke going up in the air. The real problem that we face right now, of course, is that they have been, all this cooling water that they've been using and draining out of the bottom of those reactor buildings, they have been keeping in these makeshift ponds, which are now leaking, and they don't know how to fix them. Now they're just saying, we're just going to have to dump it in the ocean. We don't have any other choice. That, of course, is going to start affecting the ocean life. It's going to contaminate the ocean and the food chain, very much so. And like I said, right after Fukushima, we had the U.S. Department of Agriculture went up to Alaska, had a big press conference with the Alaska Fishing Commission and saying, we don't need to test Alaska seafood. We know it's safe, blah, 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 blah. But when the cast of Deadliest Catch came down here to Hawaii for their end-of-season wrap-up, I got to visit the set. And off-camera, privately, what they were saying is the thing they feared most was some kid in Alaska going down to the shore, grabbing a crab, putting a radiation detector up to it, and posting the resulting video on YouTube, because they know it's a problem. Crabs are bottom feeders, and as the radioactive debris flows through the current, those radioactive isotopes will tend to sinter down, because they're very heavy and they're very, very dense. And it is a problem. I don't know if it rises to the level of an extinction level event, but it is no question it's serious, and it is going to affect our food supply. When you couple it with the poisoning of the Gulf of Mexico from the Deepwater Horizon, these GMO crop disasters in terms of reduced yields and sensitivity to drought conditions, it's a major problem. That may be another reason they're thinking about having a world war, is, kill off a whole bunch of humans before the food chain collapses.
One way or the other, given TEPCO's reactions and their responses thus far, they're not taking this anything close to seriously.
Well, TEPCO's point of view, and it's a money junkie point of view, how do we get out of this mess for the least amount of money? That's how they're thinking. That's how the government of Japan is thinking. And that's why this thing just got completely out of control. It's always been, oh, it's not that big a deal. Don't worry, it's just a little steam. And we've been hearing that stuff ever since the disaster. The question I still would like an answer to is, had that Stuxnet virus gotten into those Siemens controllers inside the Fukushima power station, because we know that safety systems did not operate correctly following the quake.
Well, that was courtesy of the U.S. and Israel.
I'd like a confirmation.
I'd
like a confirmation. We know Stuxnet was around the power plant in Japan at the time. And so we certainly cannot rule out the possibility that it had gotten inside Fukushima and had affected some of those Siemens controllers on the safety systems. But yeah, Fukushima is a disaster. It's the world's worst radioactive disaster. We're going to be living with that for generations to come. I don't know that it's
thousands of years.
I don't know that it's extinction level, but it's definitely a major assault on the future health of the human population, rather.
If you take a look at the nucleotides and their half-life.
Yes.
We're going to be seeing the birth defects, the cancer rate. There'll be millions that die from cancer as a result of this.
Yes.
And unless they do something to get that spent fuel pool and their feebled, cobbled together cooling system functioning somewhere near suitably, if that goes, Arnie, it's bye-bye North America. Well, bye-bye Northern Hemisphere.
Well, it is a problem. They've just finally documented here in Hawaii, even though most of the radiation passed to the north of us on its way to the North American continent.
You were lucky.
They have documented a 28% increase in childhood thyroid disorders in our population. So we got hit. We took a hit from this situation.
Now, remember, go ahead.
It's not just the fuel rod pools. It's not just the spent water storage pools. The fact is those reactor cores did in fact melt through down into the ground. They still have to figure out a way to deal with those. They're pouring in cooling water to keep them cold, but that water percolates down through the ground because it's through the dry well. It's into the ground, and it seeps out through the ocean floor into the Pacific Ocean. That's another source of contamination.
Yes, and I've looked at the chart showing the spread of that radiation. And again, an extinction level event is not necessarily a sudden event. It's going to take 20, 40 years, but it's going to come get us.
Well, I agree, but again, I don't share Arnie Gunderson's assessment. This is an extinction level event.
He never said that. He can't.
Okay.
He wouldn't dare.
But I think we have other things that are a more pressing threat. The epicite gene is one I've talked about before. We found out the U.S. government funded the development of a corn that produces, through genetic manipulation, a spermicide. And if that gene were to get out into the rest of the food chain, to all the corn, people eating tortillas all of a sudden find they can't have children anymore. That kind of a mistake could very quickly become an extinction level event.
Well,
there's some very dangerous technologies out there.
I think if we're patient, we're going to find out that gene is already loose.
The U.S. birth rate has taken a sudden, sharp downward turn about the same time that research was being done.
Yes, well, the kids are still doing what kids do best.
Well, good for the kids.
That's all I had to say.
All right.
I hope you and Claire enjoyed that little gift I sent you.
Oh, yes. Did you get the note we sent back? We sent you a paper note. Okay. All right. Fabulous. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I just wanted to raise the issue of the concept of interdependence. We at the lower echelons of the economies are always fed this notion, and it's always emphasized how we're all in this together, and we're all supposed to be thinking that way. Whereas at the top of the control freak, money junkie echelons, they seem to naively think that they're independent of all hoi polloi, and they don't seem to realize that the luxuries that they enjoy so much are the cream that's skimmed off the top of an economy supported by the masses.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, and I'm kind of wondering, I mean, you know, they pride themselves on being so smart, having their foundation think tanks and everything, and their sycophants tell them what they want to hear all the time. But I got to think that, even if they thought they were going to retreat to continuity of government underground hotels and stuff, they're not going to enjoy, you know, lavish lifestyle. And, you know, I'm just hoping that there are enough people in the lower levels of the upper echelons to maybe put the brakes on some of this stuff. We know that the Fabian socialists tend to be gradualists, but they do have their apocalypticist hurry types who want to, you know, do a big destruction and watch the phoenix rise from the ashes. But it's entirely possible that the phoenix may not rise the way they hope, and they haven't calculated this as well as they think they have, and I hope that saner minds prevail in the long run.
Well, I certainly hope so, too, but if the whole system comes crashing and all the money junkies are living in those underground bunkers, I say we take cement and we just cover over those underground bunkers, and that'll be the end of that. Monuments to money junkie greed.
Absolutely. I'm convinced that they'll be sealing themselves into their own tombs, you know, tearing each other apart. So.
Oh, that would be fun. I'd pay money to see that.
Yeah, exactly. Who's going to serve my food? Who's going to, you know, I'm not doing it. No, you serve me. No, you serve me. So.
Well, we should have brought some serfs in here with us after all.
Exactly.
Quick, somebody breed us some slaves. Oh, my goodness.
They may learn far too late that they actually
They always do. They always do. I'm sure Louis XVI was standing on that scaffold next to the guillotine and saying, all right, look, final offer. We'll cut taxes by... Anyway, thanks for the call, Glenn. We're going to let you go. We're coming up on the top of the hour when Claire's going to be joining us. Another phone call. Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Frank, I've got a question for you. The iodine for children with the Fukushima, what's going on, do you think that all the children ought to be taking the iodine to protect the thyroid?
No, absolutely not. Unless you are exposed to a radioactive release, you should not be taking that medication on a regular basis as a preventive because it is toxic in and of itself and it will have some harmful effects. They're simply less harmful than what you would get if you were exposed to radioactive iodine. So you should have a supply of those pills on hand. And when Fukushima happened, I bought like cases of these things, and I started putting them in baggies and mailing them to everybody I knew. And the little note was saying, you know, just put these away someplace safe and dry. You know, and if there is a radioactive release reported in your area, you know, you want to start taking them at that point. Obviously, with all this waving around of nuclear bombs from North Korea and the very real possibility that the ultimate end of all this dollarification on the globe will be war with Russia and China, yeah, people should have these potassium iodate tablets on hand, but they should not be taking them every day with their vitamin pills as a preventative, okay?
Okay, thank you, buddy.
You got it. Let's see here. Congressman Grayson is now demanding an investigation into the leak of the Federal Reserve's open market minutes early, because the people who got that information a day ahead were able to cash in on that and make huge amounts of money. Gee, I wonder who got those minutes a day early. Turns out Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan got that information when it was accidentally released a day early to certain individuals and staffers, who immediately called up and said, you won't believe what I've got. Amazing stuff here. They're holding up the system with fraud. And that obviously is not something that can be sustained. I think we're in the final throes here. When the entire economy is being held up with nothing but fraud and illusion, you know the days are numbered. They really are. Okay, Shannon in Tennessee. Aloha, Shannon. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, I wanted to bring up something. I just was on Facebook, and I noticed that there's a lot of gun owners that are getting on the Remington firearms website and calling for a boycott of them for their $80 million sellout to the state of New York for a weapons or ammunition contract, and I would like your thoughts on a boycott of them and any other firearms manufacturers that sell stuff to the gun grabber states. What do you think?
Well, as I understand it, and I could be wrong, the issue was Remington got an $80 million contract from the U.S. federal government. At the same time, they announced that they were going to stay in New York and expand their factory and create more jobs. From Remington's point of view, this is good business sense. Was there a linkage between this $80 million contract and Remington staying put in New York? I don't know. I don't think anybody does. But Remington is in the business of making and selling guns and ammunition. Government has always been the biggest customer for that kind of thing. And Remington is going to do what is best for Remington's business. And I know a lot of people think that they should have left the state of New York the way all these other gun manufacturers are leaving other states like Connecticut. But it's really their call to make. And I don't think a boycott of Remington over that particular issue is going to gain much traction.
Well, it may not, but, you know, as consumers, Americans should vote with their dollar, and I refuse to support any company that puts their bottom line over the interest of the American gun owner, and I would urge other people to vote with their dollars also. Will it stop them? Who knows? But if it's a choice between spending my money with a company like Remington or a company who's either in or moving to another state where gun rights are respected and treated good by the states, I would rather support somebody who's got my best interest at heart.
Well, that's certainly a very good thing to do, and I would encourage people to make those choices as well. But you need to remember something very important. Corporate officers in publicly traded companies are legally constrained to put the financial interests of their investors first. So it doesn't mean that the management of Remington is making a bad decision. They have to obey the law on that one. I'm going to take a break for commercials. Be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're just getting a story coming in right now. A vice president of the Royal Bank of Scotland has been arrested in Moscow over a $10 million fraud charge. Apparently, this banker, this money junkie, swindled investors to finance fake construction projects in Montenegro. And he basically, he would simply take the money and send fake reports to the investors. This is a vice president of the Royal Bank of Scotland. They are all criminals. Don't let those expensive suits and flashy jewelry fool you. I mean, when you see a drug lord and they're dressed in very expensive clothes and very flashy jewelry, you know what they are. So, anyway, let's see. Over at Harvard, Reinhardt is saying that central banks are bending over backwards to help the debt crisis. A lot of these so-called Ivy League universities, they're very much tied in with that whole power finance structure. So they're going to lend their intellectual imprimatur that things are just great with the private central bank and it's none of their fault. But basically he's going far as far as saying that ultimately, regardless of what anybody does, consumers will wind up paying for the central bank's solution, which is exactly what the central bank wants. Give us your money. Give us your savings accounts. Give us your gold and silver. That's their ultimate solution. Loot the people. And even then it won't work. It's not working in Cyprus. Private central banks cannot solve the problem. Private central banks are the problem. Over at Blacklisted News, we're seeing an article on most homeowners who are receiving part of a settlement for bank foreclosure crimes are going to receive just $300. That's it. Banks come in, they take away your home and equity, they put you out on the streets or into an apartment. Illegally, they broke the law, they engaged in fraud, but that's okay. We're going to give you $300 in exchange for that house we just took away from you. That, too, is the sign of a fascist government. They'll come back and say, look, you got your settlement. Why are you still complaining about the foreclosure fraud? It's old history. It was, that's 6 months ago. We don't have time to deal with that right now. We gave you your $300. Forget about it. It's ancient history. But you will remember the crimes of the Nazis in World War II until the day you die. Now, the British government came out with a new government watchdog on the payday loan companies that were basically engaged in legalized loan sharking, and it led to huge complaints among British consumers. And so the government said, we will put this new watchdog agency on them, and the first thing the new government agency watchdog has announced is they will not, in fact, put any caps on the interest rates being charged by the payday loan companies. So a 4,000% APR, that's good for the economic growth here. The excuse is it would be bad for consumers. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And for those of you on Justin TV, the gorgeous creature on the other side of the room here is my lovely wife, Claire, who joins us every Friday with her perspective on some of the things that are going on in the world. Claire, what do you want to talk about?
I would like to focus our listeners and people who are watching, viewers' attention on Africa. There are 3 stories here that are interrelated. And I think it's very important to know what your tax dollars are doing, courtesy of the U.S. government. The Pentagon has indicated that the troops of the Economic Community of West African States are totally incapable to carry on the fight against terrorist groups from northern Mali. And, of course, the real challenge there is the gold and other reserves, gas, oil, uranium. And a senior Pentagon official made the statement, at this stage, the ECOWAS forces are capable of nothing, stating that this situation must change. Must change for whom? The Malayan people or for the United States? And I'd like to add these stories to it. According to a report released this week by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, West African drug smugglers are playing a more direct role in trafficking the 1.25 billion with a B worth of cocaine moving through the region every year. Most of the region's cocaine still originates with Latin American cartels like FARC, but these cartels' direct involvement in trafficking drugs through Africa and Europe has declined. In their place, Western African trafficking groups are building their own narcotics, transport, and distribution systems, pushing out the Latin Americans, and are now producing their own methamphetamine on a large scale. Remember what happened after the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan?
Absolutely. The poppies are blooming. It's poppies,
yeah.
poppies.
So it's to invest in the drug infrastructure.
Of course it is. I mean, Great Britain actually fought a war against China over Britain's right to sell opium to the Chinese. And they were actually, Britain was buying the opium from right here in the United States of America.
Yep.
That money shaped our political educational culture. The Skull and Bones fraternity at Yale University was funded with opium money. And opium and illicit substances shape our politics. During Prohibition, of course, the rum runners and bootleggers were able to buy their way to political power, like the Kennedy family.
Right.
And during Vietnam, of course, the CIA was funding itself with heroin that was coming back via Air America, inside the body bags of our slain dead. We all know about the Iran-Contra scandal, the guns going down in Nicaragua, the cocaine coming back to fund it all. Governments and tyrants love the drug trade because it's a very small product that yields a huge profit.
Right.
And it always gets tangled up with war and intelligence operations.
Yes, it does. And there's a very interesting recent solicitation notice for a Defense Department contract worth up to $50 million, and it's going to be way more than that when it's finally awarded, expected to be handed over to a private contracting firm in August. Among the 2 main tasks contractors will be expected to carry out medical evacuations during, quote, end quote, high-risk activities, capable of being launched within a 3-hour notice, as well as transporting equipment and commandos from the Joint Special Operations Task Force Trans-Sahara within the borders of potentially 20 African nation.
Well, this ties in with the story I was reporting on earlier, where the U.S. is now declaring this East African cooperative military inept, and they're now starting to lobby for the U.S. AFRICOM to take over and garrison those countries.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They're looking at grabbing the resources, making sure that Russia and China cannot have access to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And China and Russia can have all those African resources they want as long as they're willing to pay U.S. dollars for them.
Right.
We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to Claire here, a story that's just now coming in. Apparently, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, must be a fun agency to work for, is starting to issue a new rule that firearms may not be sold to the holders of medical marijuana cards. And we're getting this story about how this gun stores are having to say, we can't sell you a gun if you have a medical marijuana card. And it's just another gun grab. And it's lame because marijuana users are the least likely to get violent, certainly compared to the SSRI patients. Somebody smokes marijuana, they're not going to run down the street causing violence. They're going to spend 6 hours watching the aquarium. And they're going to leave everybody else alone. But this is just any excuse to grab the guns. Any excuse at all. The veterans, they're under stress, take the guns. The marijuana users take their guns. They're even admitting SSRI is a problem. And in New York, they're confiscating firearms and permits from people who are on these prescription antidepressants. But they won't admit that's the problem because the agenda is to take the guns, to take away your right and ability to say no. And once they get the guns, they're coming back for your gold, your silver, the equity in your house, the contents of your safety deposit box, and your children's lives. Anyway, Claire, back to you. What's next on your list?
Well, I noted a story today regarding a new space race, if one can actually call it that. Putin is unveiling a $50 billion drive for Russian space supremacy. And today, President Vladimir Putin unveiled a new $50 billion drive for Russia to preserve its status as a top space power, including the construction of a brand new cosmodrome from where humans will fly to space by the end of the decade. And I looked at that article and I had to think, it is very depressing for our young, gifted, creative scientists who want to be a part of the space program, that they're going to have to learn Russian or Chinese in order to be able to do it at this point in our space history.
We do have SpaceX, which is doing very good work.
Yeah.
It's a privatized space venture. Right. They've got the contract to deliver supplies to the space station. They're getting ready to run their first manned spaceship. Mm-hmm. But again, it is very sad to have looked at the tremendous accomplishments of America's civilian space program, back when I was still a part of it, and see that in the years since, NASA has become little more than a rubber stamp for the global warming political agenda. Now, Curiosity is doing some really good work on Mars. We're looking at the data, but NASA is so politicalized. They're looking at the facts in front of them, and they still equivocate. Oh, it may not be life. We're not sure. We don't want to offend anybody in the political system. And it's almost interesting to see how our two nations have reversed since the height of the Cold War, when the United States was a nation of freedom and the open exchange of idea and daring to reach for the moon and tolerant of other people's beliefs and attitudes, and the Soviet Union was completely locked down, and everything that was decided was based entirely on politics, even if it went against the science, like the Lysenko disaster.
Yes.
And now we're reversed. Russia's the up-and-coming place. They've got a booming economy. They took control of their central bank. They've got an open society. They're reaching for the stars. And here in the United States of America, everything is locked down by political correctness and surveillance, and we're watching you and all the... It is. We've become the new Soviet Union here.
And they've got $50 billion to spend because they are not fighting these immoral and illegal wars without end.
Well, they may find themselves in one very, very soon.
Unfortunately,
unless they let a private central bank come in and take over again sooner or later. We can see the powers that be in this country. They're looking at a new war as their only solution because, hey, it worked the last 2 times.
Well, the last 2 times we did not have a number of nations that were nuclear armed. Speaking of which, I'd like to hop on over to the situation in North Korea. And yesterday there was an insistence by various Pentagon spokespeople, including George Little, who said it would be inaccurate to suggest that the North Korean regime has fully tested, developed, or demonstrated the kinds of nuclear capabilities referenced in the intelligence report. And that statement was made after a lawmaker read out the findings of a Defense Intelligence Agency report at a congressional hearing earlier on Thursday. And I would like to note that the corporate talking heads have been hyping the leaked report for all it is worth.
Yes, they have been, and there was a subtle bit of propaganda in there in which they were saying, oh, we've known about this for months. This was a classified report, and it was accidentally let out, which is their way of saying, hey, we didn't just make this up last night over scotch out on that boat in the on the Chesapeake.
Yes.
Which is
the
exactly
black
what they which is exactly what they did do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty lame thing to say, oh, well, we've known this all along, but we didn't say anything until we really needed it.
Yeah. And this is so not about North Korea. This is really about
China.
The government, desperately trying to find a way to get Americans riled up about a war against China, to slow it down economically if that's even possible. But I really would like to respectfully remind the adults in the room and the bowels of power in this country, we don't have the troop strength, we do not have the money, we sure as heck do not have the manufacturing for success with a conventional war against China. It just isn't going to happen.
Well, that's why this war is going to go nuclear. And again, for the bankers who are behind all of these wars, they don't care which side wins or loses, because both sides go into debt, and that is the whole point of the exercise, to plunge the world back into debt to these private central bankers for another 100 years.
Yeah. I am beginning to wonder, in fact, if Kim Jong-un is actually going to fire any of those missiles at this point.
I think the longer he refrains from doing so, the worse the United States is going to look. Because, the United States, wolf, 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 wolf. And I think that's why we're starting to see today sort of a pulling back by saying, well, they don't really have that. And as I was mentioning earlier in the show, CNN was running a report saying, it's amazing how many Americans think North Korea could actually nuclear attack the mainland. We have no idea where they got that from. So,
yeah, it's a little dicey out there right now. But I am just hoping that Kim Jong-un does have seasoned military advisors who are telling him this is probably the stupidest thing you could possibly do.
Well, again, I think it's mostly about consolidating his power within his own country.
Right.
Because he has not been at the helm all that long, and by talking tough, he's playing a very dangerous game, and I think he underestimates the U.S. intent to use North Korea as a stepping stone into China. But the reality is, if the U.S. does back down, and it looks like this is going to start happening from these stories that we're seeing, and again, my conclusion is the internal polling came back very, very negative. We're a war-weary nation. We're tired of wars. We don't want any more. And Kim Jong-un, I think, is counting on that for the U.S. to back down. Then he can stand up and say, I back the United States down. He looks good to the North Koreans, probably even look good to the South Koreans, and certainly is going to look far more influential to the other nations in that part of the world.
Well,
so it looks like he may have actually played this very well.
It appears that Secretary of State Kerry and his counterpart from South Korea are reaching out with offers of talks, which, if these reports are true, I mean, that could definitely ratchet down the tone and the rhetoric here, and that would be a really good thing.
And, of course, the United States will claim a diplomatic victory.
Yeah.
We saved the world from war, and the reality is it's a war they very clearly wanted, but they're not going to get. And as I said earlier in the show, I'm very proud of the American people for not buying into this, for recognizing yet another ginned-up war out of thin air after so many that have gone on before.
Yes, absolutely. I would like to hop over to what's going on in Bahrain, in the Middle East, and to our listeners and our readers, every so often you might want to take a look at a map. Because kind of knowing a little bit about geography is knowing about future activities that will affect you and your family ultimately. Apparently the human rights situation in Bahrain has gone from bad to worse. You have a Sunni monarchy, the Al Khalifa monarchy, and a population of primarily Shiite Muslims. And they're asking for really very little. A constitution. They're asking to be able to have rights.
What? A constitution? They don't even have one of those in Israel. What are these people thinking?
And the protesters have been dealt with torture. Medical professionals who tried to heal some of these protesters who got hurt by the police were themselves locked down in prison and charged with aiding and abetting the enemy. All they were trying to do was their humanitarian duty.
But we've got to go into Iran and save those people from their cruel time. What's going on in Bahrain is very simple. The government is friendly with the United States, and so the United States is not going to say anything about the human rights violations in Bahrain because they're our people.
But we have to kind of watch this. So far, most of the protests have been relatively peaceful. But if that shifts, and if there is a knee-of-the-curve moment, the United States and its military, because it is home to the Navy's Fifth Fleet, could find itself very much persona non grata with the new Bahraini government for having supported this tin-pot dictator all this time. And it's very possible that it could.
But don't forget, they only hate us for our freedoms.
Right. It's a mess.
They're jealous of our McDonald's and...
Oh, they shouldn't be.
Well, they aren't really. I was making a joke.
I know.
Okay.
But that's another area that we really, really have to watch. Oh, did you happen to mention that Russian depositors are beginning to seize property in Cyprus?
I hadn't gotten to that yet because there's a lot more news about Cyprus. We're coming up on a commercial break right now, and we'll talk about Cyprus when we come back. And aloha, welcome back to the show, and we wanted to talk a little bit about Cyprus, and the news over there is definitely not good because the so-called bailout of Cyprus and the haircuts / castrations are turning out to be a bottomless pit. They are still short 6 billion euros to balance their books. The Eurozone is saying there is nothing more they can do. And so for all this looting of the Cypriot people's savings accounts did not change the final outcome, which is what I told you was going to happen. Cyprus is on the verge of collapse. And Claire, you had some clarification on that.
Yes, I did. Russian depositors have begun seizing property of Cypriot banks. A Russian depositor has filed suit for the seizure of all assets in Russia belonging to Laiki Bank of Cyprus, including the controlling stake in Russia's Rosprom Bank.
Okay, now there's a point that needs to be made here. These banks were trying to raise capital to stay solvent by selling new issues of stock or bonds within the bank itself.
Right.
If those banks' assets are now attached in a legal proceeding, that source of raising revenue is now cut off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so it is really very ugly over there. The Euro leaders are saying they can do no more for Cyprus. Did you have anything else about Cyprus?
No, I sort of wanted to move over to a story coming out of Iran. The Treasury Department is accusing Iran of being in a far-reaching plot to sell oil.
Yes, we did
talk.
Oh,
you did talk about that.
Yeah, we did talk about this. I mean, that's what Iran does, is they sell oil. And, you know, it's not like the United States selling weapons or opium or whatever it is. That's what Iran is supposed to do. It is an expression of American arrogance to say, we will not allow you to sell your oil. And most emphatically, we will not allow you to sell your oil for any currencies other than the dollar, which is, again, that's the real issue behind all of these wars.
Right. And the U.S. is threatening further sanctions for anyone caught trading Iranian gold for oil. And, in fact, this effort to ban trading in gold, in that it is trading at all, was the centerpiece of the latest U.S. proposal at the latest P5+1 meeting. And, you know, this is just, it's ridiculous that Iran would give up materially its entire civilian nuclear program in return for U.S. permission to engage in limited gold-based trading. And of course that's going to be a non-starter for the Iranian people.
The United States does not want a diplomatic solution here. Because in Iran, that is out there with its state bank and its oil resources being sold for currencies other than the dollar, including gold, is a direct threat to the U.S. Federal Reserve dollar. And that is really what is at stake. That's what all these wars are all about. Anything else?
I think that is it for the moment, and thank you.
All right, I'm going to pull down your microphone here and go back to some other economic news. Following on the news about Cyprus, Portugal is in serious, serious trouble. They are being told once again by the European Central Bank and the European Union, the Troika, if you will, they must cut more public spending before they will have any more bailouts from the European Central Bank. Well, they've already cut public spending to the bone. And you know, there's something that these money junkies apparently aren't realizing, and it's what we're seeing in Cyprus and will see in Portugal. When you start having the government lay off all these public workers, there is no place for them to go. I think this whole idea of cut public spending for more bailouts was predicated on the illusion that people working for the government, when they were laid off of their jobs, would just go out and find another job someplace else. They aren't there. And that is why Cyprus all of a sudden had a 75 million euro shortfall. They literally ran out of money this last week. And now they're going to do exactly the same thing to Portugal. And Portugal is already in such dire straits. The Portuguese government is looking at the possibility of paying their public workers in treasury bonds. In other words, we can't give you any cash for you to live on, buy food, pay your rent or mortgage right now, but we're going to give you this piece of paper that promises 20 years down the road we will make good on all this money that we owe you. It's an IOU. Please come to work in our offices and do your job. We can't pay you. We're going to give you an IOU. And so it looks like Portugal is about ready to collapse. Just amazing. You know, yes, here's a government IOU. Back to the phones. Steve, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Let's see, I'm calling about this appointment by Obama of this chairwoman of the SEC, this Mary Jo White.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you could talk about her resume for one thing, and she's going to be the watchdog of the Exchange Commission, and but she's still on the payroll of bankers.
Yeah,
and,
it's another classic revolving door story where the government is loading up these so-called oversight regulatory agencies with people who are from the industry that is supposed to be regulated. And it's not like the SEC hasn't been part of the problem all along. We know that they basically ignored the evidence for 12 years of what Bernie Madoff was doing. Now, I don't have Mary Jo White's resume right in front of me, but I do know that it is very notable for its involvement in these financial centers. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And boy, the warmongers, they want their war. We're just now getting a report that apparently Israel has been shelling the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. So they're out there with their big guns and, you know, trying to just keep the violence up, keep moving forward to this global war for the money junkies. We're going to go back to the phones. Vince in St. Paul. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Hope you're having a good day. I got a question about Fukushima radiation. Now, being radiation burns so hot, and they're putting a lot of it into the Pacific Ocean, I got to assume that it's warming a huge amount of the ocean up above its normal temperatures. And I'm kind of wondering if anyone has done any kind of research to find out if this warming would have any kind of global climatic effect, which might explain some of the strange weather that's been going around the world for the last year or two?
Well, if you look at the volume of material at Fukushima versus the volume of the world's oceans, there is, in theory, going to be a contribution of heat to the ocean, but I would say it's probably going to be impossible to detect, let alone quantify. You've got far more heat entering the oceans from all of the undersea volcanoes and thermal vents all around the floor of the world's oceans. So I don't know that that's necessarily a factor. In theory, yes, it's got to be happening. In practicality, I doubt it can even be measured. very far away from Fukushima. Obviously, they can see a temperature increase just off the beach there. But I don't think it's a significant contributor to the world's climate compared to solar fluctuations and other larger factors.
Okay. I have a couple other comments about a couple other subjects, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
About a month or so ago, they did a test on these gold bars, and they said they were gold. And I was kind of wondering that, if they did turn out to be tungsten, would they even admit that they were tungsten? I don't think they would.
Probably not. I'm not sure which test you're talking about. Most of
it came out about a month ago. I don't remember which test it was.
Okay.
They did 3 gold bars.
Oh, I remember. I know the one you're talking about, where basically they said, we will give you the 3 bars that you will test. And, I think it's safe to say that within any of these gold bullion vaults, it doesn't matter how many of those bars have tungsten cores. They're going to have a handful of them that are pure, for the purposes of showing to the public and reassuring them and everything. You don't really know until you test every single bar, and the easiest, fastest, non-destructive test you can do is with a hospital ultrasound.
Right. Okay. And one other thing, with this crazy attitude they have about guns and kids in schools and everything, where kids are getting expelled for just really the minor, small things that they do. I'm kind of wondering what would happen if, like, a whole classroom or a whole school got together and everyone drew a picture of a gun and pasted it on the wall. Would they expel the whole school?
Boy, that would be a dramatic step to take. I would applaud the students who did that.
Yeah, I would actually like to see someone do that, a classroom somewhere or a school or something, with today's modern technology. I mean, they could, Twitter each other, everyone draw a gun at so-and-so and paste it on the wall and see what happens.
Well, the schools right now, they're just full bore on all of this indoctrination as a replacement for education. We know that the schools in Connecticut are actually teaching the children that the Second Amendment does not apply to them. There was another story that we had on whatreallyhappened.com where the new science curriculum has been put out for American schools, and it continues to say carbon dioxide is warming the world, even as we're leaving yet another record cold winter.
Yeah, it's like, April 12th here in St. Paul, we just got another couple inches of snow over the last couple of nights. I can't even remember the last time we had snow in mid-April in Minnesota here. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I had more readers emailing me photos today from around their home about the snow, and one of them sent in, said the county had actually put their snow plows into storage. They figured, spring's here, we don't have to worry about it anymore. Now they're having to go back and get the snow plows back out and get them deployed.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of worried if we're going to still be seeing snow when May comes around. I mean, May's supposed to, be the start of summer, more or less.
I would be very, very surprised to see it last into May, but I do expect it to persist in some parts for another week and a half here. I mean, it's still snowing in parts of the United States from the current storm that's over there. The reality is the cold is moving south from the poles, which it basically is your best measure that the Earth is getting colder. When the Earth is getting warmer, the cold shrinks up to the top of the poles, and when it's getting colder, it starts coming down. I really do think we're on the edge of a new little ice age. And again, it's linked to solar activity, minimum sunspot activity. I know we've just had a huge coronal mass ejection that they're expecting is going to cause some spectacular lightning storms over the weekend. But overall, this was supposed to be the solar maximum year. And the sun has been very, very quiet, and this was exactly what was noted during the Maunder minimum, during the Little Ice Age. An astronomer, Maunder, noted that there were very, very few sunspots on the sun, and we're seeing a repeat of that. But the schools are still saying, carbon dioxide warming, you will believe, children, as we teach you to believe. And what somebody needs to do, what every parent in America needs to do, is to sit their kids down and say, look, that teacher at the front of the room, a lot of what they're telling you is just bovine excrement. Yes, you've got to give the correct answers and get the good grades, but don't assume it's the real world. The government pays the school to tell you what to think. Global warming and Second Amendment doesn't apply to you. And it's just pure USDA choice bovine excrement. Oh, that's right. The USDA had to let their inspectors go because of sequestration, and they're now depending on the providers of the bovine excrement to maintain the proper quality control.
Yeah. Well, with the USDA all released, I suppose Monsanto won't have anyone now to tell them what to do.
Oh, they certainly do not. It's the Frankenfood is going to run rampant across the countryside, coming to a store or fast food restaurant near you.
Well, maybe all this global warming will kill all the Frankenfoods, It's getting so darn cold, Maybe they won't be able to grow very much.
It could be. They're proving to be very, very sensitive. I mean, they do very well in laboratory conditions, but real-world farms are not laboratories. And it gets too hot, too cold, too wet, and too dry, and these GMO crops are proving to be extraordinarily fragile.
Yeah. Hey, have you heard anything more about the locusts that were going into Israel there?
Well, they went through Israel. I think they've gone out the other side, but nobody's really talking about it because nobody can do anything about it, and they can't build a justification for taxes on it. Say, we must take a locust tax from you to save the world from the evil locusts. And again, they're only going to wave around the disasters or the crises and the dangers they make themselves so that they can sell us a solution. And if they don't really have a solution that they can sell us, then it's not worth talking about. They're making a big deal about this flu over in China. It's the next big pandemic. Quick, run out, get your Tamiflu.
Yeah, if I had $1 for every time they said that,
Well, you'd be as rich as the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
I saw one article the other day reporting on this this virus that's going around in China, and right in the middle of it said, really, they should have been taking their Tamiflu. Just product placement.
Well, then the virus would have been able to get them even quicker.
Maybe not. There's that huge scandal over how there's a measles and mumps epidemic that they're screaming about to sell more MMR vaccine, but it turns out the kids who are coming down with the measles and mumps already had the vaccine. It's just selling more medication, and if the medication makes you sick, they'll sell you another medication to deal with that.
Well, like I say, I don't think there's really any difference between today's pharmaceutical companies and the snake oil salesmen back in the 1700s and 1800s.
I agree. It's like the traveling Wild West medicine shows.
Yeah. At least back then, if they were selling you a bunk medicine and you found out about it, you could go hunt them down and shoot them or something. You can't even do that today. So
you could tar and feather them if you could catch them. The whole point of that traveling Wild West medicine show wagon is as soon as they sold their product, they would skedaddle out of there, and you'd never see them again.
Yep, most likely. Yep. Well, it's been nice talking to you.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Jesse in, I think it's Montana. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how are you, man?
Doing great. What's going on?
I just wanted to comment on that last caller. He said about all the kids drawing pictures of guns and putting them on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
My boy is in kindergarten. He's going through the alphabet, and you have the letter G, we'll say, and you draw pictures of words things that start with the letter G. So obviously, my first instinct, let's draw a gun.
Yeah, it would be mine too.
Oh, we did. We drew a gun and put gun on it. In fact, we put Glock as well. And we turned it in, never heard anything about it. And I actually talked to some other parents, and they actually did the same exact thing. And, it's kind of cool. We never heard anything about it, which is, I guess, good news for Montana.
Well, I think that tells us that pretty much everybody up there in Montana, that was their first thought. And the school said, we can't make an issue about this because too many people did it. So good for you.
Yeah, I think. And then another comment I want to make on his is I was fortunate enough to have a father that actually sat down with me and told me, a lot of the stuff they're teaching is crap. I remember specifically we had a thing they'd hand out. I don't know if they still do it, but it was called the Weekly Reader.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I remember the Weekly Reader.
Oh, man, that thing was just full of environmentalist propaganda. It was just crazy. And I remember my dad, he went to the school and threw a fit, and after that, we used to actually take quizzes on the magazine, and they told me I didn't have to do it anymore.
Well, that's a good thing. I must be a little older than you are, because back when I was getting the Weekly Reader, it was all about the evils of communism and the rest of that whole situation.
Well, they definitely just use it to scare the kids, that's for sure.
Yeah, it is. And again, they grab the kids when the kids are too young to understand that us big people will lie, and they give them the core beliefs around which they hope their personality will grow. And that's how you are enslaved by beliefs. And that is why I say, to have a free world and a free society, you must abandon all belief as a mode of thought. All belief is acting if something is true, even when it is not. And we need to get back to reality, and we need to abandon belief. And it's very hard because our whole social ruling structure is built on belief. The belief that divine right is supposed to be the way that government works. The belief in the fat man at the North Pole. The belief in the imaginary playmate in the sky. The belief in honest bankers. The belief in politicians who genuinely care about the country. All of those beliefs blind us to the reality of the world that we are living in. No chains of iron or steel ever bound a human being tighter than the chains of the beliefs we are indoctrinated with as children.
And I'll tell you what, we got a whole country full of people that believe what's going on, that's for sure.
Well, it's a dwindling minority. It's a rapidly dwindling minority.
Well, I know some of the people I've talked to, and thanks to this radio station, I've been enlightened on a lot of things, and I've been talking to a lot of people, and I'll tell you what, they're waking up, that's for sure.
They definitely are. We're seeing that. Our numbers are going up. The readership at What Really Happened is going up. We know that the corporate media is in serious financial trouble. We had a story earlier in the week where advertising revenues for the corporate newspapers are at an all-time low since they started keeping records. And it's grim out there in the corporate propaganda department. They're even starting to talk about government subsidies. It's good news for us, but they're starting to talk about the need for taxpayers' subsidies to keep the corporate networks in business because they provide a public service. If they were providing a public service, there wouldn't be a need for a taxpayer subsidy.
That's right.
No, I mean, seriously, if the corporate news would do the job they pretend to do, keep an eye on government wrongdoing, I would shut this website down, I'd quit this radio show, and I'd spend what remains of my life being a roadie for my wife, Claire. And
well, they should have just listened to Kennedy, I guess.
They should have listened not only to Kennedy, but to Edward R. Murrow.
I've never heard of him.
Well, there's your homework assignment for the weekend.
That's right, sir.
Yeah, Edward R. Murrow, and amazing gentleman, and he actually predicted what was going to go on with the corporate news media. Huge fight. I think there was a movie made about him. George Clooney was in it. I'm forgetting the name of the guy who played Murrow, but the movie is called Good Night and Good Luck, which was Edward R. Murrow's sign-off. And, yeah, just go out on the web and search Edward R. Murrow. The man was a media hero. And like anybody who was trying to tell the truth, he got dumped on a lot, okay?
How do you spell that last name, if you don't mind?
Murrow.
Thank you very much. Hey, you have a great one, and keep it up, man.
All right, thanks a lot. Going to switch to John in Virginia. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I wanted to thank you for your radio station, and I wanted to remember this time to thank Claire, because I forgot that.
I will tell her when I see her in the other office.
It's not worth much. It's coming from me. Is it okay to mention the city I live in?
Sure.
Okay. I have a letter here that I got from a parent, one of my dearest friends who brought her son down here to Charlottesville, Virginia, where I live.
Mm-hmm.
We live kind of out in the boonies. Anyway, can I read the letter?
Yes.
It's not a letter. It's actually a little short essay by a young man.
Okay, we've only got 2 minutes, though.
Well, it's done fine. I was going to Charlottesville for the weekend with my mom. I thought it was going to be a boring weekend in the country, but it turned out to be the best weekend ever. First night, I got to do so many things. John and Cindy got a big house with 3 cats. I got to make a pizza with John. It was delicious. The second day, John showed me a pellet gun. I asked if I could shoot it. He talked to me about gun safety and then threw a can off the deck. He helped me line up the target, and I missed. I took another shot, and pow! I hit the can. I was so excited, and my mom and Cindy cheered. It was the first time I got to shoot a gun. My weekend wasn't so boring after all. That's all I had to say.
Well, you know, that's very much the experience I had when I was a kid growing up in a New England farming country. Everybody gets their first gun at 12. You get a lesson in gun safety, which is the second religion. And the first time you misuse that gun, you get a trip to the woodshed that'll keep you eating dinner standing up for at least a week. And we all had guns. We would actually take them to school with us. We'd leave them in the cloakroom because part of that farming life is on the way home from school, you would stop off in the fields and you would varmint the fields. You'd, skedaddle the critters out of there. You didn't necessarily actually shoot the critter. You'd just hit the ground behind them so there'd be a cloud of dirt that would leap up and bite them in the rear end, and they would leave. And that was normal life. And we didn't have mass shootings. We didn't have any kinds of shootings. In fact, in all the years I lived in that town, there was only one shooting, and that was a stupid accident where somebody shot himself. And so we didn't have these situations. Of course, we were also not on prescription antidepressants, which may have changed the dynamic. But the guns were never the problem. But they're a problem for the government, and they're a problem for the money junkies because they need to take away our right and freedom to say no. We got to take a break for commercials. We have one more phone call we're going to get to before the end of the show today. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. One more phone call. Dale in Texas. Aloha, Dale. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? We lost Dale. All right, fine here. Last story before we head into the weekend. Over at Quantum Fund, their manager, Jim Rogers, he's very well known. He's a commodities expert, is out there predicting that the U.S. government is going to go after your pensions. And, of course, he's not the only one talking about it. We've been hearing all this talk from Washington, D.C. about forcing people to convert their independent retirement accounts, the IRAs, the 401ks, into cash, give the cash to the government, and accept in exchange for it a treasury bond, another government IOU. It's a new government-managed retirement program, and they're hoping you won't remember that there's already a government-managed retirement program called Social Security that the government has looted. They borrowed all the cash out of it, put a bunch of those treasury IOUs in there, and now they can't pay those back. And he made some very strong comments about what was going on in Cyprus, basically saying that the money junkies, the central banks, have now set up this idea that a government in need can directly take assets. And this is over and above taxation. This is going in and seizing your bank accounts. They took gold from the American people in the 1930s. They've never touched the savings accounts up until now. Now they're doing it. And he says after they've looted all the savings accounts, they're going to go for the pensions. They're going to go on grabbing all the money because that's all they know how to do. They can't fix the system because of that 11th marble. And that is why I keep saying the private central banks cannot fix this problem. The private central banks are the problem. And it has been known ever since they were created they were the problem. The United States fought a revolution to break free of this kind of banking system. And we're back in that same mess only because our politicians are corruptible and the bankers are willing to corrupt, along with starting wars. Now today, let's see how the market finally did end up, if they got their happy ending from all that massaging. Meanwhile, Bitcoin did reopen trading again today and sank another 35%. I think at this point, we can say that Bitcoin is not a currency. It's just another .com bubble. The stock market ended just slightly in the red. The Dow is 0.08 in the red, but it is in the red. They didn't get their happy ending. All of Goldman's horses and all of Goldman's men couldn't push it into the green again. So this has got to be making people a little bit nervous. And interesting analysis that came out of Washington's blog, that from the point of view of investors, their rates of return are going to be better investing in little banks than in these giant conglomerate too big to fails, because the executives in these too big to fails, they're keeping all the goodies for themselves. So there's another reason to get rid of these big, powerful banks. That's it for our show. Have a really good weekend. We're going to be back here Monday on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed. Share what you know with who you know. Please spread the word about Republic Broadcasting and what really happened. We need to reach out to that audience that is still trapped hopelessly in the matrix. Until Monday, have a good weekend. Aloha, America.